The room was too quiet. Ned Stark stood in the smoky chamber of the brothel, where Petyr Baelish had just tried to play his final card. The walls seemed to close in as the air thickened with the stench of sweat and secrets. Outside the city watch waited gold cloaks loyal to coin, not to crown or honor. Inside, Ned's hand rested on the hilt of ice, the ancestral sword of House Stark. Petyr's smirk faltered. "You shouldn't play games with men like me, Petyr," Ned said quietly, his voice low, his eyes steel. Baelish raised his hands in mock innocence. "Come now, Lord Stark, it's only politics. You're not suited for this world, too honest." That was it. For days, Ned had wrestled with the truth. Jon Arryn poisoned, the crown rotting from within. Cersei's children, not Robert's. And here, this man, this slimy, whispering little coward, had led him straight into a trap, then dared to call it politics. He didn't think. He didn't wait. With one smooth motion, Ned drew ice from its scabbard. The sword sang through the air, and in a single brutal swing, the game ended. Baelish gasped, a short, wet sound, and crumpled to the floor. Blood poured across the cush. Stone, that ever-present smirk, gone. Silence followed. The kind of silence that only comes after something irreversible. Ned looked down at him, at the mess of betrayal bleeding out across the floor. He had never killed a man like this, not in anger, not without warning. But this wasn't the battlefield. It was worse. It was the hidden war. And Petyr had been the first real enemy. The gold cloaks outside stirred, but didn't storm in. No order had been given, and perhaps they didn't care. Baelish was never loved, only feared. Only tolerated. Ser Jory Castle stepped forward, breath shallow. "My lord, what have you done?" "What had to be done," Ned answered, already knowing the cost. "The king will hear the truth, all of it." But the city didn't move like the north. In King's Landing, every breath could be a betrayal. News of Littlefinger's death traveled fast, faster than Ned expected. Varys showed up at the Tower of the Hand before the blood had even dried. "You've made a bold move, Lord Stark," the spider said, hands folded in his long sleeves. "Some would say reckless." Ned stared at him, unblinking. "Would you rather I let him kill me first?" Varys tilted his head. "No. Though you may have just lit the first flame of a much larger fire." "Then let it burn," Ned said coldly. "Better an honest war than a kingdom ruled by liars." But it wasn't that simple. It never was. 2 days later, Robert returned. From his hunt, drunk, tired, saddened by the death of a boar he'd wounded but not killed. Ned watched him carefully, wondering how a man once feared on the battlefield had become so blind. When Ned told him about Cersei, the children, and Petyr's betrayal, the king laughed. That slippery bastard finally got what he deserved? Robert snorted, reaching for more wine. "You Northerners really don't play, do you?" But Ned pressed on. "The throne belongs to Stannis. You know this, Robert." And that was where the air changed. Robert stopped mid-sip. His knuckles went white around the goblet. "Stannis? That humorless, rigid son of a bitch? He is your brother, and he is the rightful heir." Robert slammed the goblet down, wine splashing onto the table. "I won't let this realm fall into his hands. I may be a drunk, Ned, but I'm not dead yet." Ned rose slowly. "Then what will you do, Robert? Let the Lannisters keep their lie? Let the crown rot from the inside?" Robert didn't answer. The silence said enough. Outside the Red Keep, rumors bloomed like wildfire. Baelish dead. The wolf struck first. The queen plots in silence. Everyone whispered, but no one acted. Not yet. But Cersei Lannister wasn't one to wait. And Littlefinger's corpse had left a vacuum she would eagerly fill. And across the narrow sea, a silver-haired girl whispered to her unborn child, unaware that Westeros was already changing. The quiet that followed Littlefinger's death was not peace. It was the kind of silence that hangs right before thunder crashes and everything shatters. Cersei Lannister did not cry. She did not scream. She did not send soldiers storming into the Tower of the Hand to drag Ned Stark into the dungeons. No, she played it colder than that. 3 days after Littlefinger's death, a raven arrived for Ned. It bore no sigil, just a strip of parchment with delicate script in red ink. You made your move, Lord Stark. I hope you understand the rules now. See, Ned burned it in the fireplace without a word. In the Red Keep, everything shifted. Servants refused to meet his eyes. Varys had disappeared, attending urgent business. Renly Baratheon avoided him entirely. Even Sir Barristan Selmy, loyal as he was, looked tired of it all. The only one who stood firm was Arya. She had taken to shadowing Ned wherever he went, always watching, always quiet. The fire in her eyes told him she understood more than she let on. Too much, perhaps. Is it true? She finally asked one evening as they walked the hall. About what? About why you killed that man. Ned paused. The hallway was empty. Moonlight stretched across the stone floor like silver blades. Yes, he said softly. It was justice. Arya didn't nod. She didn't smile, but she held her head a little higher. After that. The next morning, the city watch commander arrived. At Ned's chambers, not Janos Slynt, but a younger knight with fear still behind his eyes. Lord Stark, he said stiffly, Her Grace has requested that your daughters join her for dinner tonight. Ned stared at the man. Is that a request or a demand? She said. You'd know the difference. He dismissed the knight with a wave and closed the door. Sansa, Arya, both were pawns now, or worse, leverage. Cersei wasn't acting through open confrontation. She was going to use the children. He paced the room, fingers pressed against his temple. His options were narrowing by the hour. He had moved first, yes, but Cersei was not fighting back with blades. She was fighting with silence, with fear, with control. That night, Ned didn't send the girls to dinner. He sent 2 guards with instructions. Take Arya and Sansa to the docks at dawn. Put them on a ship bound for White Harbor. Get them north. Get them safe. He didn't tell them why. Sansa cried, Arya argued. But he stood firm. You will leave, he said quietly, kneeling to meet Arya's gaze. Because the game they play here doesn't care how strong or smart you are. It only cares how useful. Arya wiped her nose and nodded. Sansa barely spoke to him. It broke his heart in ways even the war never had. That same night, Cersei made her move. The Lannister men entered the Tower of the Hand under cover of darkness. 20 of them, fully armed. But Ned was ready. Jory Castle had stationed a dozen Stark men by the doors. They clashed in the hall like wolves and lions, steel clanging through the stillness of night. Ned emerged from his chambers in full armor. "Ice in hand. I warned you," he told the lead Lannister. "You should have listened." "He didn't." "Wait." Ice came down like the judgment of the old gods. 3 Lannister men died in the first 30 seconds by sunrise. The tower was soaked in blood. Half of Ned's men were dead, but so were twice as many of the queen's. Joffrey was not crowned yet. Robert still lived, but his silence was louder than war drums. When word reached him that Cersei had ordered a raid on the Tower of the Hand, Robert flew into a rage, not at Cersei but at Ned. "You brought the North to my doorstep, damn you," he roared. "You let her make the rules," Ned growled back. "I will not watch my daughters die in a game you refuse to end." Robert stumbled back, drink in hand. "I'm the king, Ned." "Then act like it." They stared at each other. 2 men, once bound by war and honor, now separated by rot and cowardice. Robert didn't answer. He just drank. Ned left the room, knowing this much: the king would not save him. No one would, but maybe, just maybe, he could still save the realm, or burn with it trying. The docks were gray with mist, the kind that clung to your bones and made everything feel like a dream. Arya stood with her cloak pulled tight, boots wet from sea water, eyes darting toward every sound. Sansa hadn't spoken a word since they'd left. The Red Keep. Not during the night ride. Not during the long wait by the water. Even now, as the ship's sails creaked and dock workers shouted in low tones, she just stood there, pale, distant, trembling. Ser Jorah had chosen a loyal captain, a man from White Harbor with no love for Lannisters. The ship would take them north, far from this poisoned place. That was the plan. Arya turned back to the city one last time. Black towers, gold banners, and somewhere behind those walls, her father bleeding for honor. She clenched her fists. "We should stay. We should fight." Ser Jorah shook his head. "Your father wants you safe. He's bought you time. Don't waste it." The gangplank dropped. The girls hesitated. But the moment Arya took Sansa's hand, they both stepped aboard. And, just like that, 2 pieces of Ned Stark's heart sailed away from King's Landing. Back at the Red Keep, the city simmered like a pot about to boil over. Cersei had not spoken publicly about the failed raid, but her soldiers were doubling in the streets. Gold cloaks stood outside every door. Whispers said Varys had vanished completely. Others said he was dead, or worse, had switched sides. Ned knew better. Varys was waiting, watching, always watching Seer. Barristan approached him that evening. "They're saying the Queen will charge you with treason," he said quietly, eyes downcast. "That you plotted against her children. That you murdered Lord Baelish without cause." Ned laughed bitterly. "I killed a traitor, and now I'm the traitor." "Robert won't protect you," Barristan said, voice like gravel. "You must. Leave now." Ned looked at him. The old knight, once so strong, now looked worn thin by years of regret. "I'm not running," Ned said. "Not while she sits beside the throne and poisons it from within. You're not saving anything. By dying, I'm not trying to save myself." That night, Maester Pycelle came with a sealed letter. "From Lord Renly," he said, wheezing as he shuffled forward. Ned opened it slowly. The words inside made his pulse quicken. "Come to me now. We can still act. You have the men. I have the will. We put Stannis on the throne, or you watch." or burn the kingdom down. Renly had fled the city, it seemed, but not to hide. He was gathering forces. Baratheon blood still held weight, even if Stannis had the claim. Ned rubbed his eyes. One decision. Just one. That's all it took to tip the realm into fire or peace. And peace was looking more like a myth by dawn. Chaos came. Robert Baratheon was dead. A hunting accident, they said. A wild boar. Too much wine, too slow to dodge. A wound that festered. But Ned didn't believe it. Not for a second. The wine had been sweetened, the hunt rushed, and the wound, too conveniently fatal, poison, or plot, or both. Cersei wasted no time. Before Robert's body cooled, she placed Joffrey on the throne, crowned him in secret, locked down the gates, took control of the city watch with bribes and promises, and then came the demand. Ned Stark must kneel, or die. Ned met with his men. That same morning, only 20 remained. Northerners, loyal, bloodied from the ambush days before. We can fight our way out, Jory said. Reach Renly or Stannis? No, Ned said, eyes hard. Too many innocents in the way. This city doesn't need more blood, not ours. What then? Someone asked. I'll go to the throne room, Ned said, and I'll show them what honor still looks like. The men didn't cheer. They didn't argue. They simply bowed. Their heads they would follow him, or die with him. The throne room was quiet when he entered. Cersei stood beside the iron throne, her green eyes sharp as blades. Joffrey sat on it like a child playing dress-up. His crown tilted slightly. The High Septon stood nearby, reading from a scroll. Lord Eddard Stark, he announced, voice echoing. You are summoned to swear fealty to King Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name. Ned stepped forward, cloak heavy, heart steady. I swore no fealty to a bastard born of incest, he said calmly. Gasps rang through the hall. Joffrey jumped up, face red. Seize him. But the gold cloaks didn't move, not yet. Instead, Ned reached into his cloak and drew out Robert's final letter, the one naming Stannis as his heir. He held it high for all to see, and then he tore it in half. Gasps turned to roars. Cersei's face went pale. I will not honor a throne built on lies, Ned said, and with that, he drew ice once more, not to kill, but to remind them that some blades speak louder than crowns. Throne room exploded into chaos. Guards shouted. Courtiers screamed. Joffrey's voice cracked with fury as he pointed and shouted, Kill him now. But still, the gold cloaks hesitated. They weren't loyal to the crown. Not truly. They were loyal to gold. And Littlefinger, the man who used to feed them whispers and coin, now lay cold and rotting in a nameless grave. Without him there was no one left to puppet the watch, and Ned Stark, standing tall with ice glinting under the torchlight, looked like a man who would cut through anyone who tried to take him. The silence didn't last long. Cersei, venom in her voice, hissed at the commander, You swore your loyalty to the crown. He looked back at her, then at Ned, then at the 50 men behind him, unsure of who the true enemy was now. But Ned knew hesitation was a luxury he could no longer afford. He turned to face the room. King Robert is dead, he said, loud enough to silence the echoing panic. But his last will named Stannis Baratheon his heir, not Joffrey. You all know this. You all know what the truth is. You would condemn my son in front of the realm? Cersei growled. I don't need to condemn. Ned said coldly. The truth already has. And that's when it happened. The doors to the throne room burst open. A dozen men in Renly Baratheon's colors entered, swords drawn, and behind them, Renly himself. Not in armor, not in chains, not in power. How touching, he said, voice like silk. A northern wolf fighting lions in the south. But it seems you're outnumbered, Cersei. Her face froze. Renly looked at Ned and offered the faintest nod. We had an arrangement, didn't we, Lord Stark? Ned said nothing. He hadn't sent word, but the letter Renly had written days ago must have been more than a gesture. He had gathered men, quietly. Deadly Dot, now the realm had a third player. By the laws of succession, Renly continued, my brother Stannis is next in line. And though I have no love for him, I have even less for liars and bastards. The moment hung heavy. Cersei realized she had lost the room. She tried one last time. Do you really think that people will accept Stannis? That cold, stiff fool? My son, your son is not the king, Ned interrupted, this time louder. And he never will be. That was the spark. One Lannister guard charged forward, sword high. He never made it to the steps. Two of Renly's men cut him down instantly. Screams followed. Swords clashed. The throne room turned into a battlefield. Joffrey was dragged from the throne, kicking and shrieking. Cersei disappeared in the confusion, but not before turning to Ned with a glare that promised nothing but war. Renly took control swiftly. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply took the throne, sat in it, and looked down at the blood-stained stone beneath his feet. Later that day, the bells tolled across King's Landing. Not for Robert. That was already done. No, this bell was different. It was a warning. Word spread like wildfire. Joffrey Baratheon removed from the throne. Ned Stark alive and declared protector of the realm. Renly Baratheon seated as temporary steward until Stannis arrives to claim the crown. The Lannisters were nowhere to be seen. But everyone knew they weren't defeated. They were wounded and cornered. Which made them twice as dangerous. That night, Ned stood alone in the Tower of the Hand, staring at the broken remains of Robert's will on his desk. I never wanted any of this, he muttered. You just didn't want it done this way, came a voice from the shadows. Varys. Ned turned. Unsurprised. You hid well? Varys stepped forward, robes flowing like smoke. That's what I do. I survive. And now, Lord Stark, so must you. Because chaos isn't gone. You just changed its name. Renly won't hold the throne for long, Ned said. Stannis will come, and he'll want blood. Of course, Varys said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everyone always wants blood. Far in the west, Tywin Lannister received a raven. His jaw clenched. His wine cup shattered against the wall. He called for Sir Gregor Clegane. Gather the banners, he said. We ride for war. And in Winterfell, a white direwolf howled into the cold wind. Change had come, and it smelled of ash and steel. The message reached Winterfell by Raven, but it might as well have arrived on the back of a storm. Robb Stark stood with the parchment in hand, jaw clenched, knuckles white. His gray eyes scanned the words over and over again, as if reading them. A second or third time would somehow change their meaning. Father lives, Joffrey deposed. Lannisters ride for war. Sansa and Arya are safe. Those last words, safe, were a balm to his burning chest. But the rest? The Lannisters mobilizing, Tywin preparing to ride, war crawling across the Riverlands. That was a call, a challenge, a threat wrapped in silk. Maester Luwin stepped forward, his voice low. "You must summon the bannerman, Lord Robb." He hated that word, Lord. It felt too heavy, too final, as if calling him that admitted the truth, that his boyhood was over, and his father might not return. But he nodded anyway. Send the ravens. South of the Neck, the Riverlands were already beginning to bleed. Gregor Clegane, the mountain, had begun his slaughter. Villages burned, men hanged from trees, women taken and left to rot. Not as punishment, not even for strategy. Just to send a message. The lions still bite. And across the Riverlands, the people whispered his name with dread. But they whispered another name too, Stark. They said he'd drawn his sword in the throne room. They said he'd killed the spider before the web could tighten. They said he defied the queen and lived. The North had risen, and the realm was watching. Back in King's Landing, Ned Stark stood beside the Iron Throne, not on it, never on it, as Renly Baratheon addressed the court. It had been 3 days since the coup. 3 days of uneasy peace. Renly played the role well. He smiled when needed, threatened when required, promised unity in Robert's name. But Ned could see the truth under the words. Renly didn't want to hold the throne for Stannis. He wanted it for himself. He was just biding time. "Your Grace," Ned said carefully, "have you sent word to Dragonstone?" Renly smiled. "Of course. I've invited Stannis to return to the capital and take his rightful place. And I've heard nothing back." Funny, isn't it? No, it wasn't funny. It was expected. Stannis would not bend. He would not forget. He would not forgive. And when he arrived, it wouldn't be with peace in his heart. Varys returned, slipping in and out of shadows like a ghost. He brought news from every corner. Lady Lysa refuses. "The call," he said with a sigh. "She sits safe in her mountain and will not involve the Vale." "And the Tullys?" "Edmure raises men," Varys replied. "The Riverlands are burning under Tywin's dogs. They need Stark steel." Ned nodded slowly. "Then we ride," Varys blinked. "You plan to lead men into battle?" "I will not sit in a castle while my allies are butchered." "You may not return." Ned looked at him, eyes hard. "Then at least I'll die with honor." That evening he wrote letters. One to Catelyn, begging her to remain in the north, with Bran and Rickon. Another to Robb, commanding him to hold position and not to rush south without proper strength. He knew both might be ignored. Honor didn't always run in the blood. But stubbornness did. When the ink dried, he sat in silence. He thought of Jon on the wall, of Arya, fiery and wild, of Sansa, delicate and dreaming, of Robb, caught between being a son and being a Stark, and he thought of Benjen, gone beyond the wall, into a world colder than even this one. As dawn broke, the city awoke to see House Stark's banner leaving the capital. Wolves riding with swords, their leader in black, carrying ice across his back like justice itself. They left behind gold and corruption. They left behind thrones and vipers. They rode toward war, toward the Riverlands, toward the screams, toward the fire that would either forge a new realm or consume everything. On the other side of the continent, in a crumbling tower in Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon read the news with narrowed eyes. Renly crowned and kings. Landing, Ned Stark still breathing. Lannisters sharpening blades, and a red-robed woman beside him whispered of shadows and flames. "You must claim your birthright," she said. "The Lord of Light has shown me. The wolf will hold the gate, but the stag must strike the heart." Stannis said nothing, but the fires in Dragonstone burned brighter that night. The Riverlands were no longer lands, they were graves with names. Villages once green and humming with life were reduced to scorched earth and ash-choked silence. Crops burned, livestock slaughtered, and corpses nailed to trees like gruesome road signs. It was Gregor Cleggan's way. Leave a message soaked in terror. Ned Stark rode through it all in grim silence, his men trailing behind him in tight formation. The smoke curled up into the sky as if the gods themselves were mourning what had become of the land. Ice lay sheathed across his back, its weight heavier with every mile they traveled. He didn't speak much. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been carved into the corpses. They reached the ruins of a hamlet near the Trident, where survivors, if they could even be called that, had huddled behind broken walls and charred fences. A girl, with burns across her face, whispered to Ned. They wore lions on their armor. One laughed while he killed my brother. Ned knelt to her level. "You remember his face?" She nodded. "Big, ugly, scarred, like someone carved it with a rusted knife." "The mountain," Ned muttered. Jory stepped forward. "We need to strike back." "No," Ned said. "Not yet. We need to find Sir Edmure, rally the Riverlords." "But we can't just let this stand, my lord." "We won't," Ned said, eyes never leaving the girl. "We'll bury this land's dead, and then we'll avenge them properly." At Riverrun, Edmure Tully greeted him with tired arms and bloodshot eyes. "Uncle Hoster is dying," he said. "The Riverlands are already half gone, and the Lannisters keep pushing. Tywin's got men coming from every damn direction." Ned wasted no time. "We rally what's left, every house that still holds a sword. We take the fight to Tywin." "And the crown?" Edmure asked. "What of King's Landing?" "Let the stags fight over that rotten chair," Ned growled. "Our fight is here with the lions." But even as he said it, he knew that was a half-truth. The realm wasn't divided by lines anymore. It was a map soaked in oil, waiting for the match dot in the north. Robb Stark ignored his father's command. He rode south with a host of bannermen, Tallheart, Glover, Umber, each of them tired of waiting. The north had remembered, and it was done with caution. "Every raven speaks of war," Robb told Theon as they rode past the neck. "If I sit still, I let it come to Winterfell." "I won't be a boy lord hiding in stone walls," Theon smirked. "You sound more like a wolf every day." But in private, Robb still questioned every step, every order, every sleepless night. The sword on his hip hadn't yet tasted blood, but he could feel it humming. Waiting at Riverrun, Ned and Edmure stood over a war map. Pins marked Lannister movements. Red markers showed burnt villages. The devastation was spreading like rot. Then came a rider, dust-covered, half dead. He staggered into the war room and collapsed, thrusting a scroll into Ned's hands before losing. Consciousness.Ned read it in silence. When he was done, he crushed it in his fist. "What is it?" Edmure asked. "They've taken Harrenhal," Ned said darkly. "The mountain. He's holed up inside with 1,000 men. They're using it as a base to raid deeper into the Riverlands." Edmure swore under his breath. "We can't let them. Keep it. We won't." That night, Ned gathered his commanders. "We ride on Harrenhal within 3 days," he announced. "We'll surround it, starve them out if we have to. But we don't leave that place in lion hands." "And what of Tywin's host?" one lord asked. "He's massing west of the Red Fork, could be 20,000 strong." "Then let him." "Come," Ned said, voice calm but cold. "I'll send a message of my own. I'll show the realm that Stark justice isn't just words." He looked around the room, every face grim, tired, but willing. "This is our stand," he said. "We win here, or we die with swords in our hands." Elsewhere, in Dragonstone, fire danced across the floor of the throne room. Stannis Baratheon stood with clenched fists as Melisandre's shadow loomed behind him. "They gather in the Riverlands," she whispered, "wolf and lion. Soon they'll turn their eyes south, to you, to fire, to truth." "And what would you have me do?" he growled. "March on my brother? Burn the capital? Cut down a man like Stark who's done more good than any of the lords squabbling over power?" She smiled faintly. "The Lord of Light does not ask for mercy. He demands victory." Back at Harrenhal, Sir Gregor sharpened his blade, the sparks dancing like fireflies. He looked at his men and said one thing: "Let the wolves come. Come." The rain came down in heavy sheets, turning the fields around Harrenhal into a mud-slicked nightmare. Thunder rolled in the distance, but it wasn't louder than the sound of siege towers creaking into place or the growl of northern war horns. Echoing across the blasted plain, Ned Stark stood at the front, drenched, hood pulled low. His gray cloak clung to his armor. Ice hung across his back, untouched, not for fear, but for restraint. He didn't want to give that monstrous castle the satisfaction of its own legend. Harrenhal was no fortress. It was a scar on the world. Charred towers that looked like melted candles, stones cracked from dragonfires centuries old, and a history so cursed even the crows avoided its highest walls. But now it was home to Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, and 1,000 Lannister killers hiding behind ancient stone and new cruelty. The River Lords had gathered. Edmure Tully led the flank. Sir Mark Piper and Lord Vance commanded the archers. The Umbers rode like wild dogs, foaming for vengeance. And Ned watched it all with the silent calm of a man who had nothing left to gamble. Before dawn, the rain stopped. The banners of the direwolf and the trout waved above the siege line. Fires flickered in the distance, lighting the grotesque silhouette of Harrenhal. And then the horns blew. The assault began. The first wave hit the walls with ladders and shields, arrows slicing through the air. Screams erupted on both sides. Men falling, burning, crushed under stones. The Mountain's men poured oil from the ramparts, setting entire towers alight. Smoke curled into the sky like a curse. Ned remained with the second wave, sword still sheathed. He watched, counted, learned that by midday the siege lines had drawn blood, but not much ground. Mark returned with blood on his cheek. There, dug in like leeches, my lord. We could lose half our force before we breach the gates. Ned didn't blink. Then we won't use the gates. He turned to his map, finger tracing the southern curtain wall, cracked from age, overlooked, rarely manned. Take 50 men. Move at night. No banners, no torches. Climb the ruin. Open the postern door from within? Sir Mark hesitated. And if they see us coming, then they die trying. That night, under cover of darkness, Sir Mark and his raiders disappeared. Into the mist. Ned didn't sleep. He sat in the rain, sharpening ice slowly, methodically. Every scrape of steel felt like memory. Catelyn's touch, Arya's wild laugh, Robb's boyish pride. Sansa's songs. He whispered their names like prayers and waited. At first light, the eastern gate burst open. Not by ramming. From inside, Sir Mark was alive, barely soaked in blood, not his own. Behind him, a path of corpses stretched into Harrenhal's belly. The mountains and the great hall, he rasped. He's waiting. Ned didn't speak. He didn't call for the charge. He walked straight through the gate, into the courtyard, over the bodies, into the cursed halls of the ruined keep, ice in his hand now. Alive with purpose, his men followed. But they did not interfere. This was no battle. This was judgment. Inside the blackened great hall, Gregor Clegane sat atop a broken stone seat, a massive two-handed sword across his lap. His armor was soaked in gore. His grin was the grin of a man too stupid to feel fear. I was hoping it'd be you, the mountain growled, standing slowly. Ned didn't answer. He simply raised ice. The clash was quick, brutal, less a duel than two forces of nature colliding. Gregor was strength, all brute power and rage swinging wildly, seeking to crush. Ned was precision, economy, cold. Every blow he blocked sent shock through his bones. Every counterstrike chipped away at the beast, but it wasn't skill that ended. It was purpose. When Gregor lunged with a roar, Ned pivoted, slicing clean across the monster's thigh. As the brute fell to a knee, ice came down in a single, final arc, severing steel and flesh in one merciless swing. The mountain collapsed, his head rolling to a stop beside his ruined seat. Silence filled the hall. No one cheered. They just stared. Justice had a face, and it was soaked in rain and blood. By sunset, Harrenhal was theirs. The wolves howled in the ruins. The river lords burned the bodies, and Ned Stark stood atop the ramparts, staring west, toward the heart of Lannister power, toward Tywin. In Casterly Rock, a raven arrived. Tywin read the letter slowly, his eyes narrowed. Gregor Clegane is dead. Harrenhal has fallen. Ned Stark rides west. Tywin turned to his generals. Tell the men to prepare. Prepare for what, my lord? Tywin's gaze was steel. For war, total war. And far to the south, in Dragonstone, Melisandre's flames danced violently. He's crossed the threshold, she whispered to Stannis. The wolf sheds mercy now. The night grows bold. Stannis stared into the fire. Then we ride before it consumes us all. The march toward the Westerlands was unlike anything the Riverlands had seen since the days of Aegon's conquest. House Stark led not just an army, but a reckoning. Wolves, trout, and banners of allied river lords moved like a black tide across charred hills and broken farmland. Word spread quickly from village to village. The mountain is dead. Harrenhal has fallen. Ned Stark is coming. For the people, it was hope. For the Lannisters, it was terror. Ned Stark didn't celebrate victories. He buried the dead himself when time allowed. He refused the silver chalices offered in river-run feasts. He wore no crown, made no speeches. He didn't march for glory. He marched for justice. Robb met him halfway through the Westerlands, just north of the Tumblestone. The boy was no longer a boy. His voice had deepened. His gaze had hardened. And the moment he saw his father alive, whole, he froze like he'd seen a ghost. Ned dismounted first, walked toward him in silence. No words passed between them, just an embrace, fierce, silent, a wolf returning to the pack. I disobeyed your command, Robb said finally, and you did what you thought was right, Ned replied. A Stark doesn't wait to be dragged into war. He meets it on his own terms. For the first time in weeks, Ned smiled, but there was no time for reunions. Word came fast. Tywin Lannister had gathered his full host, 30,000 men. Every bannerman, every sword bought with gold or threatened by legacy. They were moving to meet the Starks in the field near the ruins of Castamere. Fitting, Ned thought grimly. The last time wolves marched into lion country, Castamere was drowned in stone and silence. Maybe this time it would be the lions who heard the rains fall. The battle was inevitable. The two hosts met in the valley of the Red Hills, the sky overcast and cruel. Ned sat his horse in the center, flanked by Robb and Edmure. His men stood ready, layered in steel and purpose. No sells words, no deceit. Just Northerners and Riverlanders hardened by weeks of fire and blood. Opposite them stood Tywin Lannister, cold-eyed, composed, wrapped in crimson and gold like a king who didn't need a crown to feel one. They met briefly and parley.tyn, said nothing for a long time. Then simply, "You've made a habit of surviving, Lord Stark." "I'm not here to survive," Ned said. "I'm here to end it." Tywin's lip curled. "Honor makes for a pretty tombstone." Ned didn't flinch. "And gold makes for a shallow legacy." They rode apart without ceremony. The Battle of the Red Hills began at dawn. It lasted until moonrise. Steel clashed. Arrows darkened the sky. Mud turned to red rivers beneath men's boots. Thousands died on both sides. Even Robb, fearless and bold, took a blow to the ribs that would scar him for life. But in the thickest of it, in the blood and chaos, Ned Stark stood firm, ice in hand, determined, untouchable. A man moved not by vengeance, but by necessity. And when Tywin's lines began to break, when his gold couldn't hold his men from fleeing, he made his last move. He didn't run. He ordered his knights to charge the center, to cut down the head, to kill Eddard Stark. They never reached him. Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, ripped one from his horse. The Umbers closed ranks, and Ned, with blood soaking his cloak and his left arm hanging limp from a wound, drove ice through Sir Kevan Lannister's chest and stood over the battlefield as the trumpets blared. Tywin was captured, brought in chains, face unreadable, even in defeat. They brought him to Ned under the shattered banners of House Lannister. Ned looked at him, then at the gathered soldiers. "I will not spill blood for sport," he said. "I will not burn cities for legacy." He turned to Tywin. "But justice is not a suggestion. It's a duty." The crowd held its breath, and Ned Stark passed judgment the same way he always had. With his own sword, ice fell cleanly. The lion's roar ended in silence. With Tywin dead and Joffrey deposed, the realm fractured, but not broken dot in the aftermath. Stannis Baratheon rode into King's Landing and found no resistance. Cersei had fled into exile. Joffrey vanished with her. Renly was gone, assassinated, they said, by shadows no one saw. Only the Iron Throne remained, empty, waiting. And Stannis sat it, cold, grim. Alone. Ned returned north. He never stepped foot in King's Landing again. He brought Robb home, saw Sansa and Arya safely back to Winterfell, mourned those he had lost, buried those he could not save. The war was over, not clean, not whole. But over. They called it the War of the Wolf and the Lion, and though many lords would write their version of it, the small folk whispered a simpler truth. When the wolf killed the spider, the web burned. And from that day on, they said honor didn't always die in the South. Sometimes it survived, because Ned Stark lived